Trump called NATO allies cowards. He said they abandoned America. He said no one wanted to help secure the Strait of Hormuz while Iran chokes the world's oil supply. But last night, something shifted. Canada just signed a major joint statement with 7 Western allies. And what they're saying could change everything about this war. If you've been following the news lately, you know the world is on fire right now. And I'm not being dramatic. We are literally watching a war unfold in the Middle East that is affecting every single country on the planet, including Canada. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched a coordinated military strike on Iran. They called it Operation Epic Fury. They hit military facilities, nuclear sites, and leadership targets. The supreme leader of Iran was killed in the strikes. And Iran's response? They shut down the Strait of Hormuz. Now, if you don't know what the Strait of Hormuz is, let me explain why this matters so much. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow passage of water between Iran and Oman. It's only about 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, and through this tiny choke point flows approximately 20% of the entire world's oil and liquefied natural gas supply. We're talking about 20 million barrels of oil every single day. Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Iraq, Qatar, all of these major oil producers ship their product through this strait. When Iran closed it, they effectively held the global economy hostage. Oil prices went insane. Before the war, Brent crude was trading around $65 a barrel. Within days, it shot past $100. At its peak, it hit $126 a barrel. That's nearly double. And you're feeling that at the gas pump right now. Everyone is. This is being called the largest disruption to global energy supply since the 1970s oil crisis. Some analysts are saying it's the largest in the history of the global oil market. Period. So what did the United States do? Well, Donald Trump did what Donald Trump does. He went on Truth Social and demanded that America's allies step up. He called out NATO. He called out Japan. He called out South Korea, France, the UK, Germany. Basically, everyone who buys oil that passes through the Strait of Hormuz. He said, and I quote, hopefully China, France, Japan, South Korea, the UK, and others that are affected by this artificial constraint will send ships to the area so that the Hormuz Strait will no longer be a threat. He wanted a coalition. He wanted warships from allied nations escorting oil tankers through the strait. He wanted a show of force that would tell Iran, you can't mess with global trade. And what happened? Silence. Rejection. One by one, America's closest allies said no. Germany's response was brutal. Their government spokesperson said, and this is a direct quote, as long as this war continues, there will be no participation, not even in any effort to keep the Strait of Hormuz open by military means. Think about that. Germany, one of NATO's most important members, flat out refused to help secure global oil supplies. Their defense minister, Boris Pistorius, said, we have a situation which we did not provoke, which we don't cause at all. We can't be at every place to support a war which we didn't start. Greece said no. Their government spokesman explicitly ruled out military operations in the strait. France said no. They've been trying to negotiate with Iran behind the scenes, asking for their ships to be allowed through. But send warships? No way. Japan, which gets a massive percentage of its oil from the Gulf, stayed silent. They're trying to negotiate safe passage for their tankers, but they are not sending military assets. And the United Kingdom? Prime Minister Keir Starmer said Britain would protect its own people and forces in the region, but, and this is the key phrase, will not be drawn into the wider war. Trump was furious. He posted on Truth Social, we do not need the help of anyone. But then he also said NATO's future looks very bad because of this. He called allies cowards. He said he would remember who helped and who didn't. The President of the United States essentially said, fine, we'll do it alone, but you're all going to pay for this later. And then, yesterday, March 19th, something shifted. Canada, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, and Japan released a joint statement. 7 major Western allies speaking with one voice. Now, before I tell you what it says, I want you to understand the context here. These are the same countries that just days ago were refusing to help. Germany said they wouldn't participate in any effort to open the strait. The UK said they wouldn't be drawn into the wider war. And now they're signing a joint statement. Let me read you the key parts. We condemn in the strongest terms recent attacks by Iran on unarmed commercial vessels in the Gulf, attacks on civilian infrastructure including oil and gas installations, and the de facto closure of the Strait of Hormuz by Iranian forces. We express our deep concern about the escalating conflict. We call on Iran to cease immediately its threats, laying of mines, drone and missile attacks, and other attempts to block the strait to commercial shipping and to comply with UN Security Council Resolution 2817. Freedom of navigation is a fundamental principle of international law, including under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. And here's the sentence everyone is talking about. We express our readiness to contribute to appropriate efforts to ensure safe passage through the strait. We welcome the commitment of nations who are engaging in preparatory planning. 7 Western allies just said they're ready to contribute to reopening the Strait of Hormuz. Now let's be very clear about what this statement is and what it isn't. What it is: a political signal, a show of unity, a message to Iran that says the West is watching and we're not happy. It's also a message to Trump that says we're not completely abandoning you, please calm down. What it isn't: a military commitment. There are no ships being deployed, there are no troops being sent, there are no specific actions outlined. The phrase appropriate efforts is deliberately vague. It could mean anything from diplomatic pressure to humanitarian aid to, maybe possibly eventually, military support. According to sources, the United Kingdom has been pushing hard behind the scenes to get as many Western countries as possible to sign this statement. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte has also been part of that effort. The goal was simple: show some kind of unity before Trump completely loses faith in the alliance. But here's the thing: France, Germany, Italy, and Japan have all previously and explicitly ruled out sending naval vessels during this war. Are they changing their minds now? Probably not. The statement doesn't require them to. One analyst described this perfectly. Trump wanted action. He got a press release. So where does Canada fit into all of this? And this is where it gets really interesting. Mark Carney's position on the Iran war has been, let's call it, evolving. When the war first started, Carney said Canada broadly supported US-led efforts. That seemed pretty clear. Canada was on America's side, but then, as civilian casualties mounted and the war expanded, Carney started hedging. He said the attacks appear to be in breach of international law. That's a pretty significant statement. You're basically saying your closest ally might be committing war crimes. Then he said he couldn't rule out Canadian involvement in efforts to secure the strait. Okay, so maybe Canada would help? But then, just days later, he said Canada will never participate in the military operations. Full stop. No Canadian involvement. And now he's signing a statement that says Canada is ready to contribute to appropriate efforts. So which is it? Will Canada participate or won't it? The honest answer is nobody knows, and I'm not sure the government knows either. Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand said that NATO hasn't received a formal request from the US for assistance in the Gulf region. So technically, Canada hasn't refused anything, because Canada hasn't been formally asked. But she also said that Canada stands ready to help allies and Gulf nations defend themselves against Iran if necessary. Defense Minister David McGuinty echoed that message. When the Prime Minister's office was asked what kind of contribution Canada would actually make, they gave a classic non-answer. They said, and I quote, "Any potential support would be guided by the needs on the ground, Canada's legal and policy frameworks, and ongoing consultations with partners and allies." Translation: we have no idea yet. We'll figure it out later. Here's the thing you have to understand about Canada's position right now. Mark Carney has built his entire foreign policy identity around the idea of Canadian independence. His famous speech at Davos in January was all about middle powers standing together against great power coercion. He talked about how middle powers like Canada shouldn't just accept whatever terms the great powers dictate. He said when middle powers negotiate bilaterally with a hegemon, they negotiate from weakness. That speech was widely seen as a direct rebuke of the Trump administration. Carney was basically telling the world Canada is not going to be America's puppet. We're going to chart our own course. And he's been doing that. He went to China and signed a trade deal, despite Trump threatening 100% tariffs if Canada made any deal with Beijing. He went to India and signed billions of dollars worth of agreements. He went to Japan and Australia. He's been building relationships with everyone except the United States. So now he's in a tricky spot. On one hand, he wants to maintain that image of Canadian independence. He doesn't want to look like he's just following Trump's orders, especially when most Canadians don't want to get involved in this war. On the other hand, he can't completely ignore the United States. Trump already has tariffs on Canadian goods. The trade war is ongoing and brutal. The Supreme Court just struck down some of Trump's emergency tariffs, but new ones keep coming. If Trump feels like Canada abandoned America during a real military conflict, there could be serious consequences. And there's a practical issue too. 2 Canadian cargo ships are actually stuck in the Persian Gulf right now, unable to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. Canadian commercial interests are directly affected by this blockade, so Carney signed the statement. He joined the other 6 allies in saying Canada is ready to contribute, but whether that actually means anything concrete, whether Canadian ships or planes or troops will actually be deployed, that's a completely different question. Let's talk about Iran for a second, because understanding their strategy helps explain why this situation is so complicated. Iran knows it can't win a conventional war against the United States and Israel. The military imbalance is just too great. American and Israeli airstrikes have been devastating. Nuclear facilities hit, military bases destroyed, leadership killed. But Iran has one card to play: economic warfare. By closing the Strait of Hormuz, Iran is essentially saying, fine, you can bomb us, but we're going to make the entire world pay for it. Every country that imports oil from the Gulf is going to suffer. Oil prices are going to skyrocket. Inflation is going to spike. Economies are going to struggle. And here's the clever part of Iran's strategy. They're not blocking everyone. They announced that the strait is closed to the US, Israel, and their Western allies, but they've been letting some ships through. Turkish ships have been allowed to pass after Turkey negotiated directly with Tehran. Indian ships have been allowed through. 2 Indian flag tankers carrying liquefied petroleum gas made it to India safely. Saudi tankers carrying oil to India have been permitted. So Iran is creating a divide. They're saying to neutral countries, we have no problem with you. It's the Americans and their allies we're punishing. This puts enormous pressure on countries like Japan, South Korea, and European nations. They can either align with the US and face the blockade, or they can try to negotiate their own arrangements with Iran. It's a classic divide and conquer strategy. And it's working. France and Italy have reportedly reached out to Iran to request talks about allowing their ships through. They'd rather negotiate than fight. Now let's say the Western allies actually decided to forcibly reopen the Strait of Hormuz. What would that look like? Naval experts say it would be an extremely difficult military operation. You'd need warships to escort groups of commercial vessels through the passage in convoy formation. A destroyer or escort ship could provide protection for several tankers, but that protection is limited. The threats are coming from multiple directions: Iranian anti-ship missiles from the coastline, drones that can be launched in swarms, fast attack craft operating from coastal bases, and most dangerously, naval mines. Iran may have already laid mines in the strait. If that's the case, traffic would be disrupted until mine countermeasure teams cleared the area. That's a slow, dangerous process, especially if it has to be done under the threat of further attack. The US is sending 2,500 Marines to the region, the first deployment of American troops since the war began. The Pentagon clearly recognizes that bombing alone can't protect commercial ships from Iranian threats. But here's what's interesting. One military analyst said the US should have had Marines positioned before the war started, so they'd be ready now. Instead, they're scrambling to deploy weeks into the conflict. It suggests the administration didn't fully anticipate how Iran would respond. The UK has sent military officers to CENTCOM for planning on a Strait of Hormuz coalition. They've dispatched 2 warships to the region to be ready for a potential joint effort. That's more concrete than anyone else, but a full coalition operation to secure the strait. With European and Asian navies working alongside the Americans, that's still a long way off, if it happens at all. So where do we go from here? The joint statement is out. 7 Western allies have expressed their readiness to contribute, but that's about as vague as diplomatic language gets. Trump has already said it's too late. He said even if allies come around now, he'll remember who refused to help when it mattered. The damage to NATO's relationship with the US may already be done. The real question is, how long can this blockade last? Every day the strait stays closed, oil prices remain elevated. Every day the global economy suffers. Eventually, something has to give. Either Iran reopens the strait, maybe in exchange for some kind of diplomatic concession, or the US and its allies force it open militarily, or individual countries cut their own deals with Tehran to get their ships through. For Canada, this is a moment of truth. Carney has talked a big game about Canadian independence and middle power diplomacy. But when push comes to shove, when America is at war and asking for help, what does Canada actually do? Sign a statement and hope that's enough? Or step up with real military support? Based on everything we've seen so far, my guess is Canada will try to stay on the sidelines as long as possible. Carney will make supportive noises without committing actual resources. He'll thread the needle between looking like an ally and avoiding entanglement. But if Trump wins re-election in November, or even if this war drags on for months, that balancing act might become impossible. Here's the bottom line. Yesterday's joint statement is significant because it shows Western allies are at least trying to present a united front. After days of rejections and refusals, 7 countries came together to say, we're ready to help. But it's mostly symbolic. No ships, no troops, no concrete commitments, just carefully worded diplomatic language designed to calm Trump down without actually doing anything. For Canada specifically, this is another chapter in Mark Carney's complicated relationship with the United States. He wants independence. He wants to chart his own course. But geography and economics tie Canada to America, whether he likes it or not. The Iran war is far from over. The Strait of Hormuz is still closed. Oil prices are still high, and the pressure on Western allies to actually do something, not just issue statements, is only going to grow. Will Canada step up? Will any of these allies actually send military forces? Or will this statement be forgotten by next week while the US fights alone? We'll be watching, and we'll keep you updated. If you want more coverage of Canada's role in global geopolitics, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. We're covering this story every single day. I'll see you in the next one.